For almost 1,000 years, armies believed the strongest man in armor would always win. Then one day, a farmer's son picked up a metal tube, pulled a trigger, and shattered that rule forever. A weapon born from a failed search for immortality would go on to topple kingdoms, destroy castles, and rewrite the balance of power across the world. And the strangest part? The people who created it weren't trying to kill anyone. They were trying to live forever. 9th century Tang Dynasty China. Somewhere in a monastery, alchemists aren't hunting for weapons, they're hunting for the elixir of immortality. Mix sulfur, charcoal, and saltpeter. Maybe this batch finally keeps the emperor alive forever. Instead, it burns their eyebrows off and nearly levels the building. The court records are blunt about it. Smoke and flames resulted, and the men's hands and faces were burned. They hadn't found eternal life. They'd found something that would end millions of lives instead. And for the next 300 years, nobody quite knew what to do with this discovery, except light it on fire and watch things explode. But somewhere in that smoke was a question nobody had asked yet. What happens when you stop lighting fireworks and start pointing them at people? The answer would take 3 centuries, 4 continents, and a lot of burned hands to arrive. By the 10th century, Chinese engineers strap gunpowder to arrows. Fire lances follow, bamboo tubes packed with powder, pointed at an enemy and lit. Less gun, more javelin that screams. But the core idea is already there. Contained explosion, directed force, launch something at a human being. Sir, the enemy's arrows just caught fire mid-air. That's not a bug, that's the plan. These early fire lances weren't reliable. The bamboo tubes could only handle so much pressure before splitting. Soldiers using them were essentially holding a controlled explosion a few inches from their own face. But the psychological effect was massive. Enemy soldiers who had never seen fire shoot out of a tube didn't stick around to find out how it worked. Fast forward to the 12th and 13th centuries, Chinese metalworkers swap bamboo for bronze and iron. The tube gets a proper barrel, the projectile gets a proper shape. Historians point to a bronze hand cannon dated to around 1288 as one of the earliest surviving actual firearms, a cast metal barrel designed to fire a solid projectile using gunpowder's explosive force. Not a bottle rocket anymore, a weapon. And once a weapon like this exists, it doesn't stay in one place, it travels. And where it travels next changes the shape of world history. Along the Silk Road, through Mongol conquests, gunpowder technology bleeds westward, Persia, the Middle East, and by the 1300s, Europe. The Mongols didn't just carry silk and spices along their trade routes, they carried knowledge. Chinese engineers, captured or recruited into Mongol armies, brought gunpowder formulas and fire lance designs across Central Asia. By the time the technology reached the Middle East, local engineers were already experimenting with their own versions, early cannon-like devices used in sieges from Mamluk Egypt to the Iberian Peninsula. Europe does what Europe always does with a good idea, makes it bigger, louder, and immediately points it at castles. By the early 1300s, European blacksmiths are casting their own hand cannons, crude iron tubes on a wooden stock, loaded from the front with powder and a lead or stone ball, fired by touching a burning wick to a hole in the metal. Just aim, light the fuse, and pray. Pray for what? That it doesn't explode in your hands. That was a real risk. Early barrels weren't reliable. Metallurgy was inconsistent. A weak batch of iron meant the weapon could kill the user before it killed the target. Soldiers who carried these things were taking a gamble with every single shot. So why would anyone risk a weapon that might kill them just by holding it? Because the payoff when it worked was too good to ignore. And what happened next would make every soldier on the battlefield reconsider everything they thought they knew about power. Chapter 4. A peasant with 6 weeks of training and a hand cannon could put a hole through a knight who'd spent his entire life training with a sword. Armor that took a blacksmith a year to forge could be defeated by a 50-cent lead ball. The entire foundation of medieval warfare had a hole blown straight through it. There's a strange irony sitting under it all. For thousands of years, warfare had rewarded strength, size, lineage. The biggest army, the strongest swordsman, the richest lord who could afford the best armor. Gunpowder didn't care about any of that. A gun made every man on the battlefield equally dangerous and equally vulnerable. The knight in armor, worth more than most men's homes, could be dropped by a farmer's son who'd held a weapon for the first time that very morning. That's not a footnote, that's the whole revolution. And the aristocracy of Europe knew it. Some nobles reportedly despised gunpowder weapons, calling them cowardly, because the armies that refused to use guns kept losing to the armies that did. And this was still just the beginning. The weapon itself was about to evolve into something far more dangerous. By the mid-1400s, the matchlock arrives. This is the real leap. Instead of manually touching a burning wick to the powder, which meant you needed 2 hands and a lot of luck, the matchlock uses a mechanical arm, the serpentine, to lower a smouldering cord into the flash pan at the pull of a lever. For the first time, a soldier can hold his weapon steady, aim, and fire with one motion. Sir, the new matchlocks are ready. Every soldier arms his own weapon now. No torchbearer required. Good. Faster reload, more soldiers armed, more men wounded. All improvements. Armies at the time genuinely called reload speed an improvement because the alternative, swords, pikes, and arrows, meant close-range slaughter. A gun let you kill from 30 yards without ever touching the other man. Quick numbers before we go further. One matchlock soldier could fire roughly 1 shot every 60 to 90 seconds. A trained archer could fire 10 arrows in that same time. Yet within a century, armies phased out longbowmen almost entirely. Why keep a weapon that takes a lifetime to master when you can hand a farmer a gun and get results in 6 weeks? That single trade-off, skill for scale, is the engine driving everything that happens next. But even this wasn't the moment that changed everything. That moment came at the walls of a city that had never fallen in over 1,000 years. By 1453, gunpowder weapons aren't a novelty anymore, they're a strategy. At the siege of Constantinople, the Ottomans deploy massive bronze cannons, some reportedly over 25 feet long, capable of firing stone balls that could crack walls that had stood for 1,000 years. The city that had repelled invaders for centuries falls, in part, because gunpowder made stone walls obsolete. Think about what that meant. Every fortress in Europe, every castle built to withstand a siege, every wall that had kept armies out for generations, all of it was now negotiable. A weapon designed to chase immortality had just proven it could end empires instead. Sultan, the cannons are in position. Fire until there's nothing left standing. The bombardment reportedly lasted weeks, and when the walls finally gave way, military architects across Europe understood immediately the age of the castle was over. Nobody could build stone thick enough to outlast gunpowder forever. By the 1500s, the arquebus refines the matchlock further. Lighter, more accurate, standard issue across European armies. Entire military doctrines get rewritten. Formations built for pikemen and cavalry now have to account for a line of men who can kill from a distance without ever raising a blade. Battles start looking less like clashes of steel and more like exchanges of smoke and thunder. By the 1600s, the flintlock solves the last big problem. No more smouldering cord that could go out in the rain, just flint striking steel to spark the powder directly. Faster, more reliable. It stayed lit through weather that would have doused a matchlock in seconds. This is the design that carries armies through the next 2 centuries, through colonial expansion, through revolutions, through the birth and death of empires that gunpowder itself helped create and destroy. But here's the part almost nobody thinks about. Every single improvement, the matchlock, the arquebus,
the flintlock, traces back to the same accidental discovery. Monks in a monastery, mixing chemicals, looking for the one thing that could never be found. So when people ask who invented the gun, there's no clean answer. It wasn't one country. It wasn't one century. It was Chinese alchemists chasing immortality, Mongol armies carrying the recipe west, Middle Eastern engineers refining early cannon designs, European blacksmiths turning it into something reliable, and Ottoman engineers scaling it into something that could bring down a 1,000-year-old city. Nobody sat down and designed a weapon that would define the next 700 years of human conflict. They stumbled into it, piece by piece, mistake by mistake, a burned eyebrow here, an exploded barrel there, until one day the tube in a soldier's hands could end a life from 30 paces without him ever lifting a blade. And once that happened, there was no putting it back in the box. The same invention that let a farmer's son stand equal to a knight would go on to arm colonial empires, fuel centuries of conquest, and eventually evolve into weapons capable of ending entire cities in a single moment. The line from that burned monastery to the modern battlefield is unbroken. Remember that farmer's son from Chapter 4, the one who dropped a knight with 6 weeks of training? Every soldier who has ever picked up a rifle since is standing in his footsteps. Every war fought in the last 700 years owes something to that one accidental mix of sulfur, charcoal, and saltpeter. What started as a search for eternal life became the exact opposite. A technology built entirely around how efficiently one person could end another's. And the men who first mixed those 3 ingredients never lived to see what their mistake would become. Maybe that's the real lesson buried in this story. The most dangerous inventions in history were rarely built with danger in mind. They were accidents, curiosities, experiments that went wrong in exactly the right way for exactly the wrong reasons. Somewhere in a monastery, over 1,000 years ago, a group of men burned their own eyebrows off trying to live forever. Instead, they built the thing that would decide who lived and who didn't for the next 7 centuries and counting. And gunpowder wasn't the last accident that changed how humans kill each other. A few centuries later, another group of scientists were chasing a different kind of discovery, and it ended with a weapon that could erase a city in 1 second. That's the next video. If this one kept you watching till the end, subscribe so you don't miss it. And before you go, one question for the comments. If gunpowder had never been discovered, what do you think warfare would look like today? Drop your theory below. I read every single one.